You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford, Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is... Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Natalie Haynes on the show with me today. She has a phenomenal new book. It's called 1,000 Ships, and this is a must-read. It's a must-have for your to-be-read pile, and I'm sure when you finish listening to this interview, you will agree with me. Welcome to the show, Natalie.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you. Natalie, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
You know, I never have the right answer for this because I know that what you're supposed to say is I was a child and I was reading a book and I thought that's what I wanted to be. And the truth of it is that I didn't really realize that people wrote books, or at least that people who were like me wrote books, until embarrassingly late in my life. I feel marginally better about this because I interviewed Fran Lebowitz once for BBC Radio in the UK. And obviously she is, in my view, one of the great American humorists. And I interviewed her and said, when did you know you wanted to be a writer? And she said, as soon as I realized that books weren't like trees and people made them. I was like, that's the answer I should be giving, damn it. Typical that she would find the perfect one. But yeah, I came to writing books quite late. I was a stand-up comedian for a decade in the UK first, because I think maybe that just seemed sort of more manageable. I don't know why, because walking on stage in front of hundreds of people is quite frightening in lots of ways. But you don't have to write that many words, I guess. It's quite a manageable quantity, 5 minutes when you first start gigging, and it, eventually builds to like an hour. But that's still only, a few thousand words, really, relative to writing a book, which is loads. So it took me a while to build my confidence. But I think I both always wanted to write a book and didn't believe I could write a book until I'd already written the first one, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. And that's a unique perspective that you only get from the other side of it. It may sound strange to people. Well, what do you mean you didn't think you could do it till after you did it? What was... Oh
my God, that's my whole career. Yeah, sure, of course I can do that. And then frantically, emailing somebody who already does it and going, how do I do this? That's my whole life. I don't understand how everyone else is. I assume everyone else just moves through the world completely calm, but maybe they're doing the same thing. I'm always saying, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, when do you need it? By Monday? No problem. I do it all the time with no idea how to fulfill that promise.
That's so funny. How did you break into journalism and broadcasting? What was that path like for you?
Through stand-up. Because stand-up is, or at least it was, I think now it's probably become, certainly in the past year when it's been very difficult to open clubs and theatres.
Right.
It's become a great deal more difficult to become a stand-up. But when I started in the late 1990s, it was a very egalitarian thing. It had all kinds of problems. It was incredibly, misogynistic. There were very few opportunities for people of color. And so it wasn't a level playing field by any stretch of anyone's imagination. But ultimately, if you were funny, you could at least get a go. That didn't mean you weren't going to deal with prejudice from the, circuit, from the audiences, but you would get 5 minutes on a stage to prove that you were funny. And so it was in some ways, it was a terrifying business to get into. And in some ways, it was a very open business to get into. And the UK has a fringe festival in Edinburgh in Scotland every August, which is a huge festival. So much comedy happens there. Comedians travel from literally all over the world, not just from the UK, but from the US, from Australia, from New Zealand. And so it's just an enormous kind of opportunity to be seen. And I did a show there in, God, I should know this, 2000 and I'm going to say 2 and just hope that it's right. Because to me, that feels like 20 minutes ago, but objectively, I acknowledge that can't be true. But in 2002, I did my first sort of full-length solo show up in Edinburgh, and it was nominated for the Perrier Best Newcomer Award for comedy. And I think I was the first woman to be nominated for that, because comedy was and is quite a patriarchal business. But I think that got me onto people's registers as being somebody that they should be paying attention to, talent scouts and bookers and things like that. And because of that, the BBC recorded like a 5-minute chunk of my show and broadcast it on the radio. And because of that, a TV booker heard that and mailed and said, would you come and do this topical show that we're doing? It's every night. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever, I'll come along. And because of that, I was on air doing sort of political discussion with a man named Danny Finkelstein, who is now Lord Finkelstein, because welcome to the UK, this is how we like to do things. And he was the editor of the comment pages, the op-ed opinion editorial pages of the London Times. And one of his long-standing funny correspondents, a man named Alan Corran, was very ill. As it turned out, he would be dying. And he said, would you come and write Alan Corran's column for a couple of weeks? And in the fashion which has seen me to where I am today, I went, yeah, sure, absolutely. When do you need it by? Wednesday? Okay, fine. And then promptly mailed everyone I knew who worked in journalism. I went, how do I write a column? What do you start with? So yeah, what I needed to be was funny, which I was. And actually, of course, you can gain the other skills. I knew how to write relatively tight material for the stage because, comedians write more carefully in lots of ways than pretty well anyone, I think, except poets and advertising copywriters, because advertising copywriters are paying for the word per word, and poets need scansion and rhythm and things like that. But comedians need that too. So you're incredibly careful about how you write. You're constantly editing yourself because you have to. And so actually, I was pretty well placed to write op-ed. I wouldn't ever describe myself as a sort of, want to put a phrase, like a proper journalist who goes and does investigative journalism and reports on things. I'm definitely not that. I've done very little of it. But in terms of being able to write a sort of set piece for a newspaper, yeah, no problem. When do you need it? An hour, no problem at all.
Well, we've seen throughout history that some of the most potent truth comes out in comedy, and especially in stand-up comedy. There's something about coupling truth and sometimes very hard to swallow truths with laughter that makes it palatable in some weird way. But if you really want to know where the pulse is, go see a comedy show. That's where you can really get to the truth a lot of times. What do you think it is about the connection between getting people to laugh and then being able to speak the truth about something?
I think humor is intrinsically quite cathartic. Annoyingly for people like me in particular, it's the case that we have half of Aristotle's Poetics, the half that he wrote about tragedy, and how tragedy, by watching it and seeing these sort of terrible traumatic events play out on stage, we reach a state of catharsis in which we feel better about our own lives because we've watched these very much worse lives. I'm, obviously extrapolating, but I'm assuming that almost none of your listeners will have an experience to rival that of Oedipus, for example. Let's just hope. Right. Or, the chances of any one of us getting torn limb from limb by a mother who has, in a kind of drug-filled religious frenzy, mistaken us for a mountain lion, Euripides the Bacchae, slender. I'm hoping slender. So, of course, we have a cathartic experience watching tragedy, but infuriatingly, the half of the Poetics which he wrote about comedy doesn't survive. The search for that text is the MacGuffin in the Umberto Eco novel, The Name of the Rose, which you may remember also as a film with Sean Connery. And so I think we often don't think about comedy in the same sense. But I think if Aristotle's work had survived, perhaps we would take comedy more seriously, because for Aristotle, there's no difference really, I think, between the catharsis that we achieve from watching tragedy, seeing these sort of much worse events than our lives dramatized, and watching comedy, seeing things which are intrinsically kind of sillier than our lives, people in all kinds of scrapes, for whom things go terribly wrong, but ultimately there is a very low risk of things being really awful. It's comedy. We know even when we watch a really harrowing moment in a comedy, we know that it'll probably all turn out fine. That's how comedy usually works. And so we reach that cathartic point in the same way. And I think the idea of truth in particular, comedians have a sort of, it's like their secret superpower is the ability to tell a truth as they perceive it. It's not necessarily objectively true, but their version of what is true. They can offer that to an audience, and they have the status and the microphone to make an audience listen. Now, you might not agree with a comedian. You might not agree with their viewpoint. You might not find them funny. You might not like their jokes, but people do still listen. That's why, historically, authoritarian governments lock up comedians. It's because there's something very powerful in ridicule. If you're laughing at someone, you're not afraid of them.
Right. And
so I think that kind of power, we can date it back at the very least to court jesters, who were prepared to laugh at kings. And it's not nothing, that power, that refusal to be cowed by authority, it's not nothing.
Natalie, in talking with you, the classics are ingrained in your conversation, and this is something that you obviously feel passionate about, and is a topic that you are comfortable with. Your first book that you published, The Ancient Guide to Modern Life. First off, how did you come to love the classics as we think of them, and what instigated this first book, The Ancient Guide to Modern Life?
I love classics because I had a brilliant teacher at school, and I mean high school, not even university school. So I was super lucky. I had really, really good teachers from the get-go. I started learning Latin at 12, which is unusual.
Wow.
I know that to an American audience, the whole of the UK seems a bit like Hogwarts, and I do understand that. But even by the standards of the UK, that is a particularly Hogwartsy episode in anyone's life. So I started Latin at 12 and ancient Greek at 14. It's a mystery that I had any lunch money at all, to be honest with you, for the whole time I was at school. It's lucky I was tall. And I had great teachers who were very inspiring. And I think maybe the difference between learning modern languages, because I did French as well, and I am partly Belgian. But in terms of the UK, if you study a language like French at school, you get to do kind of conversational French. So you get to, ask, where's the train station, please, etc. And that's really useful and practical and fine. But if you do Latin or Greek, you get to read a big chunk of epic poetry in which, sea snakes attack the children of an angry priest. And it's like, well, which of these is going to appeal to me more at the age of 15? Sea snakes all day long. So I was super lucky that I got to study them at school. I went on and did my degree at Cambridge, England. I have to specify, don't I? Not Brainy Science, Cambridge, Massachusetts. But yeah, Brainy Classics, Cambridge, England. And so I got to study there too. And so classics has been part of my life for the absolute, longest time. I was a classicist before I was a comedian. I wasn't a very good classicist before I was a comedian, but you could argue that I wasn't a very good comedian for a while either. It took a while to learn how to do either of these things, and you have to learn them by doing, I suppose. And as for Ancient Guide, it came from a newspaper article that I wrote for the London Times. And at the point when, I'm going to say, Gordon Brown became Prime Minister of the UK, having taken over from Tony Blair, they asked me if I would write an essay comparing modern political leaders to ancient political leaders. And I said, yeah, sure. When do you need it? By Wednesday. And wrote that. And it was one of those essays that just makes people write into the paper for weeks afterwards, generally to go, dear the editor, Ms. Haynes would appear to believe, but, generally people wanted to say, oh, I completely agree when you say X is like this ancient emperor, but actually I think they're even more like this ancient, and so on. So it got this huge debate going in the letters pages. And it was a very small step from there to be able to sell the book, because, generally I think the problem with classics at the time, and that book came out in 2010 in the UK, was that people didn't think classics was relevant, or that they wouldn't be interested. And it's like, well, look how many people find it interesting. Look how many people are kind of arguing over it. And so, yeah, it was just good luck, really, that the paper asked for the piece and it wrote itself, really.
So after realizing that that there was a place, a hunger almost in modern audiences for the classics and for maybe a new view on the classics. Did you find that you had a particular voice? Did it ever strike you that, and you kind of talked earlier about kind of stumbling into things and then realizing after the fact, oh, I may need to learn how to do this when you've just done it. Did you realize that, I do have a unique voice and I do have a unique perspective on this topic that maybe the world needs or the world wants, or
the world will at least pay for sufficiently for me to pay my mortgage.
Exactly. Like, did you realize your kind of place in all of this?
No, not for ages. Because I think maybe it's a particular weakness of mine, but I wonder if it's a weakness of people in general who have that slight imposter syndrome where you kind of think, I can't believe I'm getting away with this. Is it doesn't occur to you to value the things that you're good at, because you tend to be focusing on the things that you can't do. So what you tend to do is look at the world thinking, everyone else knows exactly what they're doing, and I'm just getting away with this until they find out and throw me out on the street. And so it took me a while to realize that actually it was quite an unusual combination of things that I had in my brain. It's like I can be funny about these things which are incredibly erudite and serious. When I write about Greek tragedy or Greek myth now, I will have gone back to fragments of Greek poetry in the original Greek in order to, find out more about it, and I'll translate them myself. And it's quite an unusual thing to be able to do that and simultaneously not to be a super serious academic writing academic text to be read by pretty well only other people in academia. But I didn't realize until quite a long time afterwards. And I have a radio show in the UK called Natalie Haynes Stands Up for the Classics, which I think you can get on Audible in the US. But if your listeners are listening anywhere where BBC Sounds exists, then it's there for free. I think you probably have to subscribe to Audible, but I'm not quite sure. And that was a way of kind of combining stand-up, which I had obviously done for 10, 12 years, and the ancient world, knowledge of the ancient world, ancient history and biography are basically what the program is. And I mean, it took ages to sell it, even to the BBC, which is pretty keen on supporting completely bonkers projects like that. It still took 3 or 4 years to persuade them that there would be an audience for this. We get 1.6 million listeners per episode. And it's broadcast in a country which only has 65 million people in it. So it's like, again, there was a market for it, but who would have guessed from beforehand, when I was so optimistic in my 30s, going around knocking on the doors of commissioning editors going, hi, it would be really cool if we could make this program about classics and it'll be funny, I swear. And they were like, yeah, Natalie, thanks very much. What's over there? Slams door. And so it just took ages to kind of persuade people. But then once I was doing it, it was one of those things where people went, well, yeah, of course this would do. But I'm still astonished that when I do the live version of that, which obviously I haven't been able to do very much in the past 12 months, but I generally tour, a book for a year, sometimes for longer, all over the world. When 1,000 Ships came out here in May 2019, and I took it that year alone to Australia, to New Zealand, around the UK, Cyprus at one point. And so even then, I was kind of noticing that that very young people were coming, teenagers, and often they were teenagers who were just really nerdy and who liked the radio show. And sometimes they were young women bringing their moms or grandmothers to the show because, they all listened to it together or they read the book, and it became clear to me in a way that I couldn't possibly have predicted that it was becoming a kind of intergenerational thing. And that's how I get lots of email from grandparents saying their grandchildren introduced me to them, or they introduced their grandchildren to me, and now they're listening to the show together in lockdown, in different parts of the country. And it's incredibly moving because who knew that would ever happen.
Speaking of imposter syndrome, we've done more than 1,000 episodes of this show, and I've talked to lots.
You know how to do it yet? Just asking.
No,
I know. That's the thing, is it makes no difference how much you do it. You're like, well, I haven't been fired yet, so I guess I should do another one. Why can't we get over it?
It's crazy. But the vast majority of the authors that I've had on the show talk about this imposter syndrome, and it's definitely, I think it's a part of the human condition. It's not just writers who deal with this, but there's only been a handful of people that did not struggle with imposter syndrome. And I honestly don't trust those people. There's just something.
Students, when I go and speak in schools, and I feel bad now because it might be on the record who denied imposter syndrome on your show. So let's hope nobody goes through the archives. But
I didn't name names.
That's what I always say to kids is don't worry if you feel like you can't do it, because the people you need to worry about are the ones who are absolutely sure they can. Because those people are basically dangerous and insane. Because we definitely all can't do it. We're all winging it and hoping for the best and trying really hard. And I genuinely believe that although I understand imposter syndrome can be very destructive, it does also make you very careful. It means that you're always going, I need to ask for advice. I need to get help. I need to, study harder to make sure I know how to do this. It makes me, I think it's the flip side of being kind of perpetually curious and wanting to learn, is the sense that there's still so much left to learn. So I completely agree with you. The people who think, oh yeah, no, I totally know how to do this. Do you? Do you really? I'm extremely skeptical that that's the case.
Dream Author by Sophie Hannah is an immersive 14-month coaching program for writers at any and every level of experience, and also for those of you who want to write and are just waiting for the right encouragement and guidance to get you started. Your writing dreams should make you happy. For so many of us, our dreams are not a source of happiness. Instead, they cause us stress, guilt, frustration, and even shame. Here's the great news. All of these feelings are natural and all writers experience them. The problem, though, is that when your writing dreams bring you more anxiety than joy, it affects your resolve and your productivity, and you end up not taking the action you need to take in order to propel your dreams in the right direction so that they can stand a strong chance of coming true. That's why Sophie created the Dream Author Coaching Program, to teach anyone who is passionate about writing how to change the way they build, think about, and pursue their writing dreams in order to become their own most powerful ally and advocate for the rest of their writing life. And more great news. Once you've learned that skill, it lasts forever. Visit dreamauthorcoaching.com to get started today. Well, and hopefully that imposter syndrome kind of goes hand in hand with staying hungry and always feeling there's more to prove. Maybe prove's not the right word, but there's more to do. There's more to accomplish, more to prove maybe to just to our own selves. But I think that hunger and that imposter syndrome go hand in hand. Speaking of going hand in hand, that your two loves in life appear to be the classics and humor. How do you feel like these two dovetail, and where do they kind of collide in your life?
Well, mainly they collide on stage. My novels are much less funny, much more serious, much sadder than I am on stage, because I suppose I am both of those people. I am somebody who can experience really profound emotions of upset, of grief, and stress and negativity and all of those things. And I think that's probably true of almost all comedians, just small sidebar. But it doesn't mean that I don't find things funny, even things which are personally incredibly upsetting to me. I will make a joke in the middle of a breakup, in the middle of a row at a funeral. I can't help it. It's like a sort of glitch in my brain, I guess. But at the same time, I think that's sort of okay. Funny people don't move through life with nothing bad happening to them. And so you'll find in my novels, I think, that sometimes there are moments where they are quite funny, and sometimes there are moments where things are just devastating. And sometimes there are moments where those two things kind of gel, and you go, oh yeah, no, okay. Terrible things are happening to somebody who is intrinsically, a funny person. That is realistic. That's how things are. But for me personally, it's mainly on stage. It's been the worst thing for me about lockdown. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have missed my loved ones. I should get that out early on. I really, really miss you all. And yet I really miss being on stage. I miss audiences. I miss interacting with them. I miss the act of creating something with an audience that only exists once, just that one night. That's what I love most about stand-up, and it's sort of pure form is that it just exists between the end of my toes and or the end of my microphone and the toes of the people in the front row. You know, this magical thing that we create just for that, and then it's gone forever. And I love making that and sharing it with people. And so, yeah, it's been extremely hard this past year not being able to do that almost at all. But I can't deny it. You know, writing books obviously gives me a different pleasure because you get to create something that is not so transitory. And, you know, I spent, nearly 12 years as a stand-up. And in the end, the kind of only making things that were so ephemeral, it wasn't satisfying to me anymore. I had loved it and I still love it as part of my life, but I couldn't have it as my whole life. I wanted to make things that had a bit more permanence. And, you know, you look at a shelf full of books that you wrote and you made a thing. You know, you can see that and register it, and it's incredibly satisfying. So I guess that they have to kind of exist in harmony for me. I would be really sad to bring out a book. I mean, I did bring out a book in the UK called Pandora's Jar, which I think will come out in the US in spring 22, I think. But I wrote the last chunk of that at the beginning of last year, a year ago. But then it came out in October. So I've only done one live event for it and everything else has been online. And it is hard not seeing audiences, and it's lovely getting the feedback. And of course, it means that when I do an event online, people can come from all over the world, and that's fantastic. And yet I miss the sense of creating something with a live audience. I always will, until we're allowed back to do it again and it's safe.
Your new book that just released here in the States, at least 1,000 Ships, has had quite a journey already.
Quite a great day.
Yeah, even though we're just discovering it here in the States, it's been out for a couple of years in the UK. And as you said earlier, it's kind of journeyed all over the world. Tell me, what was it that that first inspired this book for you? What was that first spark that let you know this was a story you needed to tell?
I think it's the only book I've ever had a proper light bulb moment for. And I'd written 2 earlier novels, which were both basically retellings of Greek tragedies. One called The Amber Fury in the US, it was called The Furies, which is set in the contemporary world. And one called The Children of Jocasta, which was a retelling of the Theban story, the Oedipus myth, as we might think of it, from the perspectives of Jocasta and her daughter Ismene. And so I'd looked at telling Greek myth, and particularly Greek tragedy, from 1 or 2 different perspectives. And then I was walking home from town. I walk a lot. I run a lot. I walk a lot. I'm happiest on foot. And I was walking home from town, and I was going past the running track in the that's next to the park on the way to my home. And I thought, you know what I'd like to do next? I'd like to do the Trojan War. And I took like 3 more steps. I was like, but like the whole war. And I'd like to tell it from all the women's perspectives. I could do like all the Trojan women stuck in Troy who were basically, you know, hostages for 10 years, under siege for 10 years. And I do all the Greek women who are waiting for their husbands and sons and fathers to come home. And I could do all the goddesses. And I was like, wait, could I? And I nearly ran home. And I was kind of frantically Googling, thinking somebody must have done this already. And I was just sitting at my desk going, is this mine? Is it mine? Can I have it? Is it mine? And as it turned out, you know, there are an awful lot of women in ships, but not all of them. I couldn't make them all be in it because there are too many. But I thought, how many times have we seen stories of the Trojan War which focus on one man or another man, or several men, or maybe one woman or one household? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take it out big. But I was an embarrassingly long way through before I realized that I was trying to write an epic, that I wanted it to be right in the midst of the action. This is what the Roman poet Horace describes epic as being. We come into things in medias res, he says, in the midst of things. And so I really wanted to write this story that kind of threw you in. So the first big chapter of 1,000 Ships is like an action movie, I hope, as Creusa, who you could read more about, or actually rather a great deal less about in book 2 of Virgil's Aeneid. where she has a very small cameo role, which is basically to go, oh, well, be careful, and then disappear like a 90s girlfriend in a Hollywood action film. Does she have any other things to say? No, just tell him to be careful, and then, okay, great. And so I wanted to give her some backstory, but I hope that it means that you properly get kind of thrown into the fall of the city of Troy, because I thought, well, that's the bit that everyone knows is the Trojan horse. So I'm going to start with the horse, and then I'm going to move the story forwards. I'm going to show the consequences of the fall of the city, of what happens to all the women who are in Troy, all the women who are waiting for their husbands to come home to Greece. And I'm also going to show the causation of that war and how the war is lost for the Trojans or won for the Greeks, how the war is fought on both sides, how the war began, and take it further back and further back. And I thought, I'm going to tell the consequences timeline forwards, I'm going to tell the causation timeline backwards, and I'm going to start with the horse, and that'll be fine. And I wrote a page which basically said that and sent it to my publishers and said, this is what I want to do next. And to their enormous and enduring credit, they went, okay, and left me to it instead of going, you want to do what now? You want to change voice every chapter? Are you sure? They were so good. And they just said, yeah, okay, do it. You can do that. All right, thank you. And then, 10, 11 months later, I sent them the first draft and they were like, yep, that'll do. So, yeah.
What is it about the Trojan War that is so that is so important about the time that we live in now? Why is it important to look back on this story, and how do we see threads of this, coming into our modern life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is one of the great foundational myths of European culture, and therefore also, of course, of American culture, because we have fed each other's art and culture for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it is one of the great foundational stories. I've been trying for years to sell to the BBC a program where we get to go to all the different Greek-named towns and cities in the States, go to all your Athenses and Spartas and places like that to say, look, that these stories don't belong to the old world with heavy inverted commas. They're everyone's. These stories have stretched everywhere. And so I think, this story of, stories of war always extremely unhappily are relevant because there is always war. And so when 1,000 Ships first came out, somebody asked me, a journalist asked me and said, how is this relevant to the modern times? And it's like, well, dude, I would love it if we didn't need stories about women being trafficked in the aftermath of a war. I would very much rather my book were irrelevant. I'd be fine with that, honestly. But unfortunately, in the actual world, that's still happening. It's happening all the time. And I thought the idea of looking at a war from the women's perspectives felt like a very 21st century interaction with the Trojan War, I suppose, because I thought those are voices that we haven't often heard. We focused on the male heroes who fight on the battlefield. And I felt very strongly. I saw a really brilliant but extremely harrowing documentary at the Cannes Film Festival, which I was reviewing films for the BBC years and years ago. And I saw this film about restorative justice in Rwanda, where, of course, there was a horrific genocide, as though there could be any other kind of genocide. Sorry, but you see my point.
Right.
And these women were being asked, essentially, who had been the survivors of this horrific war, but also had been asked to, therefore, in order to allow their country to rebuild, had been asked to essentially forgive their attackers so that everybody could carry on living alongside one another. And it was an extraordinary and very upsetting watch, because, of course, what you want to say is, well, look, these people have decided to forgive rather than, live with this pain. And, now they're being able to move forwards. And what you actually saw, at least what I actually saw, was women who realized that it didn't matter if they forgave these men or not, because they were going to have to live next door to them, whatever. So really their opinions just weren't valuable. And I felt that they were being asked to do something unimaginable, and they were doing it because they didn't really have a choice. And that was in my mind almost the whole way through writing this book, truthfully, for all its bookishness, for all its classical scholarship and all of the things that people notice in it. That's the sort of hidden part of this book's inspiration, was this extremely difficult and devastating film about a very contemporary war. And so I suppose that was in my mind really all the way through it. And I think, although sometimes the book is lighthearted, sometimes it goes into territory which is quite whimsical, and then it always comes back, I hope, to this beating heart, which is, what happens. A war doesn't only happen on the battlefield. What happens when it spills out? What happens if the people who are the victims of war aren't the people who die of it, but they're the people who survive it, but have lost everything? In the case of the Trojan women, they even lose their freedom. So their husbands, fathers, brothers, sons have been killed, and also they are now enslaved. And that is that's a side of the story that I felt we didn't see very much of. If you look at the Wolfgang Petersen movie Troy, I don't necessarily recommend that you do. I found it quite boring, if I'm honest. Then we get to see beautiful Brad Pitt being beautiful, and actually I think they do him quite well as Achilles, because he's very, very quick, which is always what Homer says of him. He's swift-footed Achilles, and so we see that as an intrinsically heroic thing. But it probably doesn't feel that heroic if you're on the receiving end of his killing sprees, or right. if your loved one was or is. So it was very much a question of saying, well, what does this story look like if we look at it from another perspective? And I felt like I'd done that in quite a focused way with the Children of Jocasta, the story of the Theban conflicts. You can look at them from pretty much any angle and they stand up, because it's such an extraordinary story. And even in the ancient world, this is true of all myth. These stories are being told in completely contradictory and different ways, because they're being told across the Greek world, by multiple storytellers, across generations. So you end up with stories that don't, there's no original version. There's just lots of different early versions. We have no idea which one came first. And I knew that the story would stand up to whatever I could do to it, because it's survived perfectly well for, 3,000 years nearly. And I felt the same way with the Trojan War. It's like, well, there's a version of the story of Helen and Paris, Helen of Troy, as we call her, but she starts out life as Helen of Sparta, obviously, otherwise it would be a very short war. And there's a version that dates back at least as far as Homer, to the very early 7th, probably the 8th century BCE, so very nearly 3,000 years ago, in which Helen doesn't go to Troy at all. She goes to Egypt. And it's an image of her, an eidolon is the word in Greek, which is created by the gods, but made out of air, literal air. That goes to Troy instead. The war is fought in exactly the same way. But Helen is never there. She's completely blameless. And yet she is still derided as this sort of terrible, slutty adulteress who ruins everything for everyone. And I kind of think, well, when there's a counter myth that's nearly 3,000 years old, that's as old as the myth, then, you really can just pick your way through these stories if you're prepared to dig around and hunt them out and work out which version you want to tell, which version you think sings to a contemporary audience. Mine focuses on the women because I am one. It's the 21st century. I think women's voices are being heard in ways they haven't always been. And so, of course, my version was going to focus on that part of the story, but there are plenty more perspectives that haven't been heard or haven't been heard as much. So, these stories are still ripe to be rediscovered. They're full of archetypes and drama, and they're the beginning of everything in storytelling terms, and in lots of ways for many of us. Even Aeschylus, the 5th century BC tragedian, described his plays as slices from the banquet of Homer. So people have been slicing up Homer for a long old time. It felt all right to do it again.
There's a lot to take away from 1,000 Ships, and there's so much in this book. But when people finish the book and they close that back cover, what do you hope they're left with?
I hope that they are left with a sense that they needed to be told this story, that whatever they knew about the Trojan War, and I don't mind if it's nothing. You don't have to have a degree in classics to read this book. I wrote it for everyone, not for just nerds, although I'm obviously always writing for nerds because they are my people. I also wanted people to be able to come to the Trojan War brand new to this. And so if the only things you know about the Trojan War are that Achilles had a heel and that the Trojans had a horse, you should be fine. So I hope people can come to the end of the book and think, I didn't know that, and I feel like I've experienced a way of looking at a story I either didn't know very well, or only knew a part of, or didn't know at all, and that I've heard voices that I don't normally hear. I hope that's what people take away from it.
Well, Natalie, I love the book, and I love your take on familiar stories, and some stories that we think we're familiar with and realize that we're not so familiar with when we really start digging in. And I love that you are shining a light on that. If people are just learning about you, where can they find you online if they want to dig into all the great stuff that you're doing?
I am official N Haynes on Twitter. I am Natalie Haynes, stand-up classicist on Facebook. I have no idea what I am on Instagram. I pay a young person to do it. I don't understand pictures. I can't help it. I'm good at other things. Shut up. And the website is nataliehaynes.com. So you can find the radio show or podcast on Audible or BBC Sounds. You can find, last year I made a set of short films about Ovid poems, the Ovid poems called the Heroides, which obviously I made so that we could hashtag them Ovid, not COVID. And those are all lurking around on my Facebook page, and you can find links to them on Instagram and on Twitter. So depending what you want, if you want to hear more women from the ancient world, those are all the best places to find them. Otherwise, you have to be patient until Pandora's Jar comes out in the US next year. And then after that, there's a novel about Medusa, which I have got to write more words off, otherwise there won't be.
Well, the book is called 1,000 Ships. We're going to put links to it in the show notes of this episode to make it easy for people to find it. Natalie, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been such
I'm recommending this book to everyone, and
You're
I
so
hope
lovely.
that
Thank you.
and I hope that lots of people find it. Natalie, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you.